Welcome to Friday night's video in our second master series. This is, I do believe, the 20th video in our second master series and the second video on looking at oscilloscopes. So basically what we're going to try to go over here is I really want you to keep in mind that first of all that the oscilloscope in your DAW, hopefully that came stock with your DAW, probably will get done what you need to do for the most important information that you're going to need to look at. Second of all, that most of the important information is very basic. It's not like we're trying to build a rocket ship when we're doing music production. So really keep that in mind, that you may not need a $140,000 oscilloscope to try to look at your music production. And the next thing I want to get through your head is that to really read your manual, oscilloscopes, you can spend $140,000 easy on a desktop oscilloscope. So the one in your DAW probably isn't a $140,000 oscilloscope, and on top of it, that what it's trying to show you may say one thing but not doing exactly what a $140,000 oscilloscope would be doing. So really keep that in mind, and if you're really having trouble understanding what it's trying to tell you or what some button is trying to do, ask the manufacturer for some real detailed information and keep repeatedly asking for finer and finer detailed information so you can really understand what it's trying to show you. So that's a huge concept. But other than that, there's some really simple information we want to look at. I mean, basically, you're going to have like, this is the main channel coming in from the main left of some channel I'm looking at. And it's showing me that footprint over time. And it's got a scale here. I can choose the main right or main left of a given track or something like that, or a side-chained right and left track in there. It's giving me a scale, so I can expand upon it, make it bigger or smaller, depending on what I'm trying to do, depending on how well I can see it, so that if it's really teeny, I can expand it out some, or if it's really big, I can squish it down a little bit, so it's not jumping outside of the field of vision and things like that. And an offset. This offset can make, obviously, offset where you have it. That way, if you have two or more waveforms on there, that you can offset them a little bit so they're not sitting right on top of each other if you're analyzing some real finite or detailed information of what's happening. And also, you've got some, this right here is going to show you your right and left channels. This is showing the main left and the main right, and it's showing those two channels so that you can look at problems like phase issues. You might be having phase issues or transients on one side or the other, or, you know, something going on that you want to look at as it's going along through time, that you can analyze those two channels separately very easy. And you can also invert one side or the other also. You can actually, it's got a phase inversion button that'll actually invert it to where it's actually an inverted view of it. And you can side chain in. I've got this here, and this is side chaining in some other information. So I'm basically getting some shots of what's happening here, side chained in, so I can visualize the other channel. If I have two different channels that I want to side chain together, then I'm side chaining this left. I can phase invert that also, invert it, and with the same parameters available on the other channels to be able to look at those two channels together, to look at levels, samples, or over time and things like that. Now that's pretty simple, and you'll normally have one that's on here that you've got some selections A and B, A and C, B and C, that's going to do a couple things. It's either going to sum those two so you can see those two summed, or it'll show you the difference sometimes of those two channels that you're looking at. So you'd be looking at here at A and B, or A and C, you'd be looking at A and C and what that's showing you. So you can freeze that, and those two channels mixed together, summed together, look like that, so you can get some information about what's happening, what's going on. And don't worry, we'll get into it as we start looking at uses for the oscilloscope, that some of this stuff will become much more apparent why that would be important to you. So normally that's what you're looking at when you're looking in this area up here, to get that information, which is invaluable once you really understand that what you're looking for, and footprints and levels and things like that. commonalities so that you can evaluate if something looks out of whack that might be hard to see, on your spectrogram, or you've got a lot of distortion, which means this one of them might be just really super wavy and choppy, means it's got some higher end hiss going on that's hard to really see on the spectrogram, or between the two of them you can really evaluate what's going on and how it's affecting the summed waveform really quickly like that. So those are some of the basic parameters over here to help you do that, and it's great for all kinds of purposes that we'll look at. Now, also you've got this time scale that's basically going to allow you to squish up the time or expand the time. So you can get a detailed view like this, or it'll look more like a waveform up here that you're looking that's all squished together that you'd have to expand upon to get that information. And basically what that parameter is normally doing. And then you may have an offset here, which basically in music may or may not be that valuable to you, because it's trying to show you from a starting point and show you what's happening before it hits it and what's happening after it hits it, rather than it's just showing you from the starting point of wherever you're capturing from. That way you can get like looking at, what am I looking for? What's happening right before, I took that snapshot, and seeing what's happening before. Does that make sense? A certain point. So that can be valuable. Sometimes it's debatable how valuable that might be in the studio. Now you get into here and you've got triggers. First of all, if you're dealing with like the slope, that it basically is going to be set this trigger level to whether you're on the getting triggered from the slope on the rise or below. So on the downfall or the rise of the sinusoidal and or waveform, the rise and fall of it, of the cycle, that you're catching on the rise and fall, whereas transient would be just catching it up above. It'd be catching normally supposed to be catching transients. When it hits a certain level, it will start triggering it. So that's usually a pretty simple concept. Or you leave it off and it should just work on triggering it at certain levels. And the hold time here will allow you to, it'll hold as it triggers for so many milliseconds, so you can evaluate it. It'll re-trigger and re-trigger and re-trigger after so many milliseconds. And you may have something on here that's going to be set to which channel, A, B, C. You might have an external that you have routed into it, or it's free, which that I'm not going to get into because that can be debatable what that is on your oscilloscope, what it's trying to capture or show you. So you want to look at all these parameters that we've just talked about in your DAW, especially like one shot here is giving you a one shot. You want to capture it right there, and you want to re-trigger it again there, and re-trigger it again there to see what's going on in a certain amount of time from a certain point, which is pretty simple and fairly easy to understand. Those parameters are very simple. And then you can look at this from samples. If you look at the little white pop-up window, it's looking at how many samples from 0 over here to the window length, or seconds, the window length. And if you look at the pop-up, the first one on the left on that pop-up changed to milliseconds instead of samples. And you can look at it from percentage levels that's next to the readout, or dB. Most of the time when you're dealing with audio and music, you'll probably want this set to seconds and dB levels to really take a look at what's going on at certain levels. And your crosshair might be set to certain channels. So now it's set to channel A and green, and so it's given me that whatever's going on that's from the green one that's on there. I can change that to this B or the C or the summed math one that may be a summed of the 2 channels that you're trying to deal with, or the 3 channels you may be trying to deal with, or it may be showing you the difference of them. So basically it's a pretty simple, what we're looking at is pretty simple. Now, this may sound really obvious and stupid, like, well, yeah, I understand that, but what use do I have of that? Well, we're going to get into that. But you understanding exactly what it's trying to show you and the use of it at first, so that when you pull out your oscilloscope, that you understand what it's trying to show you. We'll go in the next videos, we'll start getting into what you can do with that. That way that you can really start making use of this really cool tool that's called the oscilloscope. Just keep in mind that as we go through this, that the parameters and the things we're looking at normally in the studio are pretty basic, and we're looking for some pretty basic things. I do not dissuade you from getting some expensive oscilloscopes or trying to download some ones that are really nice ones, or buy a $150,000 desktop oscilloscope. You know, you can get a pretty decent one for about $2,000 or $3,000, a pretty nice desktop oscilloscope. It's not a $150,000 oscilloscope, but I'm not sure you need a $150,000 oscilloscope to make a reggae movie or a reggae song or even a Whitney Houston song, but you may, I don't know. There's a lot of information those kind of oscilloscopes can show you that you may or may not find a whole lot of use for when you're doing music production. But the things we're going to be looking at, that these things can be invaluable to look at different things happening in a different way, that we can catch things sometimes or visualize things a little bit differently to try to evaluate this. Because a lot of times people look at the oscilloscope that I've seen, they look at this and they go, what is that? Looks like some kind of funky pink, green, and yellow soup. You know, well, what use do I have of that? Well, you're basically looking at a bunch of footprints that are, you know, going to interact with each other in certain ways, and they will form commonalities sometimes when certain things are combined together or by themselves have particular footprints that are fairly common that can help you detect issues. And also you can detect phase issues, you can detect transient issues, you can detect all kinds of things happening. When things combine, certain things are normally going to happen. You know, like you've got a guitar and a bass, and you hit a C chord and a D note on the bass at the same time. They're going to have some commonalities. What's going to happen when you sum them together? And you might find that one of them's a problem in the processing you've done on it, because now it's showing an uncommonality that it doesn't sound as good. Where you did this other mix and you took snapshots of what that commonality was, and it should sound like that. So then you start trying to dissect what you did or what you might need to do using your oscilloscope and your spectrometer and the tools that you have to visualize as well as listen, to try to make that come out sounding as good as possible, or to come out sounding as good as you've done it previously. So, you know, and we have talked about that when we're looking at spectrograms, about mapping out footprints, and we're going to talk about the same thing with oscilloscopes. So this, what some people see as a mess that they don't ever pull out their oscilloscope, make a lot more sense, and then they go, wow, I can do all this stuff with my oscilloscope. All of a sudden they buy 2 more monitors, one for your spectrogram and your oscilloscope and your level meters, so that they just start looking more like now, saying it's actually of use to you. It's just not a bunch of flashy lights on the wall, you know, which is cool, they look cool, but you actually have use of them would be good also, you know, instead of them just another cause for you to buy an extra monitor. So I hope that made it real simple. And I really hope that you don't get lost into thinking you need to buy a $50,000 oscilloscope, because as we get done looking at the oscilloscope and the uses of it in the studio, the most basic meat and potatoes uses that are going to be most important to you, that it will become very apparent that hopefully that the one you have in your DAW, or you might purchase one that, because your DAW doesn't have a very good one, that it will probably get done what you need to do just fine. And once you understand the uses of it and being able to read it well and understand the information it's trying to give you and what the significance is of it, that it becomes another really invaluable tool to help take you to the next level as an audio engineer. So I certainly hope you enjoyed this video looking at oscilloscopes, and I will see you in the next video when we start talking about footprints of the oscilloscope.